Thanks, Andrew. So what we'd like to do here is have this be a very fireside chat-ish kind of atmosphere. So I'm going to ask a few questions. I'll add in my own points, but I also encourage you to throw out questions at any time. So this is supposed to be comfortable. There is a microphone at the back, so if we'll have a runner run around, but jump in at any time with your questions. I thought maybe before we get into the meat of determining your own path, is there anything else you wanted to add about your career or your bio that's relevant?
I'll start, and I think the big thing for me is that it's a journey, and you're on a journey, and like Laurie said, you're not too sure where that journey is going to lead you. But I think what's really important is to keep an open mind, follow your passion, and also not be afraid to try new things. And to, if you worked in a large corporation, often you might work in 5 or 6 different roles before you really figure out what you're good at. So I think my career has been full of change and learning, and it's all led one thing to another. I never really knew where I was going, but I've wound up in a pretty good place, so I'm pretty happy about that.
It's interesting that you say that. I was reflecting on what the panel before was talking about, and they were basically addressing the same thing, that, through circumstance or just through pursuing different passions and interests, they ended up where they are. And when I looked at my own bio, I thought, mine is a tale of pursuit of passion, for sure. It's not a linear path. Trevino, do you have anything about your pathway that... I feel like you're a planner, though. Did you know where you're headed?
Well, I think I've always known where I was headed, and you are right, I am a planner. And I think if someone asked me where my life was going to be when I was 10, I could pretty much map out where it was going to be. That said, one of the great things that I find about being an athlete is learning to be adaptable. And because everything comes down to choices. And for me, there's times where different path in my life that I decided to take, just make a different choice, because my needs, my wants eventually change. So although I have things mapped out, it's allowed me to know exactly to have that direction, but I am not that inflexible that I don't make different choices and change things up as I go along.
I know this isn't on the list questions, but I'm wondering has there ever been a time where you've made, or either of you, where you've made a choice or pursued a path and you thought, I want to do a course correct. Has that ever happened to you?
Yes. For myself in business, and if I was to pull out my resume and show you my resume, it's taken a lot of different, I've been in retail now for 16 years, and I've done a lot of different things, and there's times where I've had to take that step backward to take 2 steps forward. One of the things that I often get asked about in my, whenever I go to an interview is, Trevino, why have you had so many different positions? And that's that path where going down, seeing something that I think I would like and end up not liking it, I just, I'm flexible enough, and I've learned from sport that you course correct. And there's nothing going and not, as much as I always have, and I keep saying this, as much as I have a plan, the great thing about being in sport is that you're not afraid to try something else. Whether you're being racquetball, and you said that, the way my swing is, I have to change it up if I want to get better. So as long as you're on that path to getting better, I find that it's okay to course correct.
Yeah, I've had a few course corrections along the way as well, and I think you're right. It's just being adaptable that's really important. I know that at one point I worked for a event marketing company, a very successful company, and just was ready for a change. And this was just when the whole social media craze was starting, and I went off for 6 months and I worked for a company called Iceberg Media. I don't think it's in existence anymore. And I was going to get into the whole social side, and it was really the future. Well, it just wasn't for me. And I realized that very quickly, luckily because of my network, and so the network piece is really important. I found a role at McLaren Momentum, big event marketing company, big agency in Toronto, and within 3 years I was the president of that group. So, you know, don't be afraid to you know, try new things, but yeah, know in your heart when it's right or not, and don't be afraid to course correct. But I think the networking piece as you go through your evolution is absolutely critical.
Yeah, I want to add something there, and we're going to get into a little bit about when you start planning for your career after sport. And I was thinking about my career in sport and what really helped me prepare, because I'm not, unlike Trevino, I'm not a long-term planner. I'm someone who, I only said I want to go to the Olympics when it was a reasonable goal, where I was like, I can't actually make it to the Olympics, therefore I'd like to go now. That's more my style. It sounds so horrible, but it worked. And then, you know, you go down that path, and I say I want to be the best at that. And then I see another thing that interests me, and I think I want to try that. But what really prepared me for life after sport, but actually every area of my life, is something that my dad actually taught me when I was quite young, which was the importance of building networks and connecting with people. And, you know, he would always say it takes a village, usually to say I was a really high maintenance child and it took a village to manage me. But he sort of meant it takes a village to raise a child, to build an athlete, to be successful in business. It's actually really misleading, and I think, not to get philosophical, but North American culture, we often talk about pulling yourself up by your bootstraps and doing it by yourself and rising from nothing, which I think is a bit of a lie. I think it really actually takes a lot of people to help you get where you want to go. If you think of to go back to, you know, what my dad was teaching me, he showed me that showing interest in other people and what they've accomplished and asking for advice was a great way to build a network and to build contacts. And throughout my sporting career and then after my sporting career, those people, those relationships I built have been hugely valuable. And they're sincere relationships. Like I've showed an interest in them, and then they in turn showed an interest in me. So that is sort of what set me off on my pathway. You know, how did you start preparing for retirement, and what were you working on during your sporting career to get you ready?
So that's an interesting question. When I saw it and thought about it a little bit, one of the things that I don't know if there was ever that transition, because, you know, life after sport sounds like I've separated myself from sport into my current role, and I really haven't. And I think that the one thing that I've learned, and I haven't changed, is at Walmart there's something for everyone that they say it's called your IDP, which is your individual development plan. And whenever you have your end of year review, they always want to review your IDP. So what's your plan? What's your plan for the next step, or a lateral move, or what's your plan in business? And I've been at Walmart 8 years now, and every year I go through this thing called my IDP. And after about 3 years of going through it, I realized I've had an IDP my entire life. I just don't have it formally written down on a piece of paper. And so every different sport is part of my overall IDP. When I worked at Sears, that was part of my overall IDP. And now Walmart is just part of my overall IDP. So there's things that I did in sports that I continue to leverage now in business. And there's things that I did from my educational piece that I leveraged when I was in sport. So I have this overall piece about how I map out my life that continues to use different pieces and use different columns from different areas. So to say that I've made this transition, I haven't, because most of what I do, my commitment to being successful comes from sport. Something that they talk about in business all the time, leadership comes from sport. So every time when I talk to my associate, I usually draw back on some type of analogy that has to do with sport. So for me, I really haven't left it.
That's interesting. I love that concept of it all being a part of one story or one journey. Do you have anything that you did or that helped you?
Well, I think my evolution started way back as an athlete, and being involved with Athletes Canada was one part of that, but also certain role models that really inspired me. So for me, Bruce Kidd would have been one of those role models. Former dean of the University of Toronto. I was a student there, in phys ed. Now is a very prominent scholar. And I remember sitting with him once and saying, you know, and I was one of the 1980 boycott children. So that was not a great experience, but thankfully we haven't had to go through that again, and hopefully never will. I'm sure it never will. I think the world has learned its lesson. And, you know, kind of down on life a bit and on sport, and he looked at me and said, Dan, you got to be in the room. If you want to change things, you got to be in the room, and you got to be positive about change, and you've got to work with people to make change. So that was for me a bit of the start of evolution of leadership, to say, okay, well, you know what, I better get in the room, and I better be positive, and I better be constructive. And so that has really guided how I've thought about and that was part of my transition, is to say, yeah, you know what, I want to give more than I take, and I want to contribute. The second piece was another conversation I had with Dick Pound, you know, and I said, so Dick, how did you get involved in the COC? Like, he was involved with COA at the time, very, very early. And he said, well, someone gave me some advice that if you really wanted to have influence in the world, you needed to be the secretary. You needed to be the person doing the notes and writing the minutes. So I volunteered in the first meeting to be the secretary, or I think he said someone volunteered him, actually. So, you know, that was just another example of how you got to get in the room, you got to be a positive force, and you got to help make change. So my evolution has all been about, you know, getting in that mindset and then really trying to make a difference. So that's part of my evolution. So I'm still evolving, I guess, as well. But you know, that was a core component to making that leap.
Can I ask one question about that? Two things, actually. Anyone who's on the board is loving the fact that you mentioned people jumping on the secretary role, because that is the hardest role to fill. I was the secretary. I think Mike said, you like to write, Claire, you be the secretary. And it's true. I did actually learn a lot about board process and really paid close attention to the content of what was happening in the meeting. But I wanted to ask you a question that's particularly relevant to this group. You said that the piece of advice was you want to go into the room when you want to make change. You need to be in the room, right, and you need to have a positive attitude about it. So how do you deal with that when, and it happens in business, it definitely happens in sport, where you're not feeling positive about the direction that something's going? How do you sort of turn your attitude around to be a positive presence at that table?
Well, I think you got to find a way to create a win-win in whatever environment you're in, and you've got to understand other people's perspectives, and you've got to find ways to collaborate. So, you know, it's very easy to get your back up and to think of reasons why you shouldn't go in a certain direction or collaborate. But in the end, we've all got to move forward, and the only way to move forward is to compromise and to, you know, find solutions.
Thanks, Dan.
You know, there's a story, because I think we've talked in some of, I know personally for what some of the things that I've said come across, you know, like there's a philosophical component to it. So I think what really works is when you give a real life example of how sometimes transition in work. So I talked about leveraging some of the things that you do as an athlete into your business life. Let me speak to you about leveraging people you meet and some of the opportunities you meet, and how I get started with my own career. So I'll probably dovetail into probably one of the other questions. So it was the Commonwealth Games in Victoria, and I can't remember because I'm too old now. Was it 94? 94, yeah. And so, okay. So at that Commonwealth Games, it was they had one of the most amazing clothing package that you'd ever seen, and so there was just tons and tons of stuff that was there, even better than some of the Olympic Games that were there in terms of the amount of stuff you got. And so one of the ladies that was a volunteer that was in charge of it was a lady by the name of Margie Schuett. And so I was young, one of my first major team. I was just wanting to get as much clothing as possible. So I was down by the clothing area every day trying to get more free stuff. And so in doing that, I got to know her very well in the 2 weeks that I was there. And she was going like, "You're back again, you're back again." So the games ended, and I got her phone number, and I emailed and told her thank you for, all the things that, that I got off her. So I learned the first thing about influence, which is a big thing about leadership, is convincing people and influencing people to get what you want. But I sent her an email just to say hi, and then the second email I sent her was, do you think you could get Sears to sponsor me? And she politely told me, "I don't think that's going to happen." First of all, she said it politically correct, but you're not good enough, and Sears doesn't really sponsor individual athletes. And you know what? I sent her back a note saying that, "Thank you, much appreciated," but I didn't stop talking to her. I'd still email her and touch base with her. In 2000, when it was time for me to retire, I remember seeing her, and she asked me, "What are you going to do?" And I said, "Well," and I did my undergrad at Western, and I want to go to law school, but I'm now broke, so I have no money. She said, "Well, I think I might have something for you." And it was a position on her team as a project manager of event and sponsorship. I thought that was the greatest job an athlete could transition into, because at the time they sponsored Skate Canada, they sponsored I think it was the LPGA women's tournament that was in Canada. They also had the Leafs and the Raptors. So my job for about 9 months was just going to Raptors games. They sponsored them most in Indy, and so it was the greatest job. But the piece for that, and the position that I'm in now, about 15 years later, I now work for one of the biggest retailers in the world, Walmart, and I'm responsible for $2 billion in sales in my department. And the only reason, because I knew absolutely nothing about retail, never thought of it. Only thing I knew about retail is to get a cashier's job. And even now, to this day, 15 years later, once a year, a couple times a year, I'll send her an email to say, "You know what, thank you, because I have no idea, and I wouldn't be for where I am today if it wasn't for it." But that taught me something, and it showed me that you never know when that opportunity is right there and how you're going to leverage it. And when I talked earlier, and one of the first comment that I made was about choices, that was a choice that I made. Because when she rejected me for that sponsorship, I could have made a choice to say that, "You know what, forget you, and never want to talk to you again, you rejected me." But not getting that sponsorship has paid me tenfold over and over and over again, and probably wouldn't stop paying me. And which is so funny, there's two things that I wanted to do. I wanted to either go to law school after I retire or do my MBA. 2 years ago, Walmart paid for me to do my MBA. And so I still ended up there just a different way, and the money didn't come out of my pocket.
That's a great story. That's a great story. What I love about it, and I think what I want to highlight about it, is that you just never know, right? And what you did was conduct yourself appropriately. You built a relationship. You were courteous. I know that sounds basic, but one of the things that I've noticed in clients of mine, corporate clients of mine, who end up meeting roadblocks along their career path is often when they've burned a bridge, when they've done something or behaved in a certain way that broke a relationship or compromised their integrity in some way. It often comes back. So I'll put that out there, but that's a really powerful story, really, really great. I want to just turn the conversation quickly to Athletes Can and the role of Athletes Can, and please feel free to just jump up and ask a question. We're all friends here. How, Dan and Trevino, how did Athletes Can play a role in developing your leadership skills or opening your mind to the athlete voice
Well, of course, it was very powerful for me. And back in the day, I mean, we're talking 1977, 1978, long time ago. And the situation of athletes is very much different than it is today. And there were some basic rights and deeds of athletes that were behind the times, and there was a need for a movement. So, for me, just getting involved with Anne and the group and doing all the plumbing around, doing all the bylaws and forming the board and doing all that was very motivating, and we really felt that we were creating something quite special. And you just never know where life's going to go or where it's going to take you. But there were some basic skills that we learned just going through that have all kept us all in good stead going forward. And everything from organizing the first forum and organizing the buses to go up to Talisman, organizing the catering at Talisman, organizing what we were going to do, trying to find sponsors. And I think that for me was a big part of why I stayed in sport and why I got in the whole sponsorship area. And so there were a lot of skills there that we learned that we weren't really knowing we were learning, but that were really, really important. So, I think that the role of the athlete advocate, the role of ensuring that we have athletes have a voice and are heard is critically important. But for me, it's more the life skills that it teaches you that you can take into whatever you do. And I think those skills have transcended and allowed me to, one, work as a marketer, and two, get involved in governance and being on boards, and that that governance thing is pretty unique when you're looking, if you want to get in the not-for-profit area. There aren't a lot of people that have kind of some technical sport expertise, understand marketing, then understand governance, and then learn about administration and managing people in groups. So, there's lots of great skill sets that you can develop as you go through life. And for me, it was a bit of a journey, and each little building block built upon another until where I am today. So, it's sort of a curious path, but it all started with wanting to be an athlete advocate and caring and giving back to community.
That's great, Dan. Thanks. Trevino?
So for me, very similar to that, and I think one of the things that, and I won't paint everyone with a broad brush, but what I will say for myself, and there's a word called leverage, and what I find, I know athletes and some athletes and myself, we don't do as good a job as we can leveraging things. And I'll give you a perfect example. Being a part of this board taught me a lot of things that I still today can't learn in my current role, because I started off as a member, and then I became a vice president. Now, there's not too many organizations that are there for us that you can have that opportunity to be a vice president. And let me tell you something, whether you are a vice president of Athletes Can, or you're a vice president of Walmart Canada, a billion-dollar company, some of the same fundamental skills you learn, because you learn decision-making, you learn leadership, taking charge, being responsible for an entire group. Those are things that you're not going to get to. You may go your entire career your entire life not getting those opportunities. You know, something as simple, I see it every day at work, public speaking, getting up and talking in front of an audience that you trust. These are all things that you have to practice. It's not, you know, you think it's something that's easy to do until someone actually one day in front of a big audience where you're actually being judged, not being judged by your peers or friends, but this is something that you're being judged in your professional life. Say, hey, you know what, tomorrow morning you have a presentation in front of so-and-so, and it's the first time you've done it, and you go, these are some of the fundamental things that you could do. So I always say you can always attend something, you can be there, or you can get involved. And that again come back to choices. So you're here this weekend, you know, you've made the time, and someone else have created an opportunity for you. How do you leverage that? Because it's all about how you leverage things.
Thanks, Trevino and Dan. And I just had a memory of Trevino. So Trevino was vice president when I was president of Athletes Can, and he had this way of sitting at the table and smirking when you knew he disagreed with you, and you were, I just saw a hint of that smirk, and a shudder went through me. But what I love, which kind of reminds me of one of the sort of softer skills that I learned through Athletes Can, and I love that it's really a mix of some very practical things like board governance and how to look at bylaws and amend bylaws, and how do you behave in an AGM and public speaking and so on. For me, it was a lot about confidence. That's what I learned, especially when I became president, and I thought, oh my goodness, I have to sometimes be sitting across the table from a very senior leader, and at the time I was in my 20s or late 20s, thinking, they must be looking at me thinking, what does this person know? What kind of life experience do they have? But you had to sit there and bring the athlete voice to them with a level of conviction. And I started to realize that they would be nodding their heads across the table, and they, you know, and you start having these little victories where they're saying a good point and interesting point. And I started to realize I have a valid perspective. I can represent a large group of people's views. And that I now see, I didn't see it then, but now when I look back through the lens of my current role as an executive coach, where I'm often sitting across the table from senior partners in large professional service firms who are 60 years old, looking at me, and I'm advising them, or I'm their trusted advisor, and I think they trust me. If I sit here with confidence, you know, I've done this before. So it was very much a training ground for my confidence, amongst many other things. So maybe just to close this up, I'd love to hear from the two of you, maybe the one or two key pieces of advice you would give to this group about thinking about their path in business or life after sport or continuation of this career.
For me, I think following your passion is really important, to really try and understand what you like to do, what are the things that motivate you, and with a little humility to know that there are some things you got to do that you're not going to want to do, and that it's all part of the journey. And I think that perspective. I think as athletes, as you transition, you've got to also decide. I mean, I heard Jeremiah talk that he was an all or none athlete. Like, he had to be in it because it was so intense, and he had to be focused. And you got to make that decision as athletes as you go through this journey. I was a little different. As I was a little older athlete, so I sort of evolved into it, and I became an athlete advocate, and you know, I took on some leadership roles, and I loved it. So that was part of me. But you have to decide. So I think my number one piece of advice is follow your passion, but understand as well that it's going to be a journey. Mm-hmm. And as long as you continue to learn and develop new skills along the way, you'll find your path.
That's great. Great advice. Trevino?
So I've said it many times this evening. it's really comes down to, it's about the choice you make. And so you have to really think about what's that next step for you. The second thing for me is leverage, and keeping an open mind and being open to things, because you know that gold medal that you're looking for may not be where you think it is. So you want to keep an eye on that, because it is a journey, and so you want to make sure that you look at everything along that path. I think the piece that, if I reflect back, one thing that I may have adjusted a bit was, remember, everything you do in life has a clock on it. And the moment you start it, the clock starts. And so sometimes when you're an athlete and you're, in being really successful in your sport, don't get too lost in that. Enjoy it for what it is, and don't get too high. Same thing as when you're in that valley and things aren't going too well. Don't get too low, because there's a time clock on all of those things. And I think if we continue to remember that, it will help you get out of the peaks and valleys, because there's one thing that's for sure: there are peaks and valleys.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, and it kind of reminds me that our careers, whatever careers, I mean, this career, the career after, and we'll go to Orange Cap in a second, is that now I've lost my train of thought. What did you end with? Peaks and valleys. You know what? It was a brilliant point, but it's completely gone.
You'll get it back after the question.
I should not. I got distracted by the good-looking fellow in the orange hat. It might come back to me, but I wanted to, two little pieces of advice I wanted to give. That when I was reflecting on this, I think it's important also to remember we are clearly three very different people with very different paths, very different strengths, very different gaps. And it sounds like we're kind of all saying, this is a huge opportunity. You're going to have more. Look for them, leverage the experience and the skills you've got. And you might not realize you're leveraging them until you look back and go, wow, I really used that skill. But the two pieces of advice I have are kind of a repetition, but get connected. So now, and that's something you can do now. So ask for advice, meet new people. Ask for help. One of the most valuable things in the things I'm doing, I've got 4 kids as well, is constantly asking for help. And the second piece of advice is get interesting. So I hear what Jeremiah is saying about he likes to have all his eggs in one basket, and a lot of us are like that. I think while you're doing that, also look for opportunities that align with your goals or align with where you want to be. Try to, or think ahead if you can. I'm not the greatest at that, but I certainly like to say yes to opportunities. And those opportunities, when I've pursued them and been interested in them, made me an interesting person and often led to an opportunity down the road where I was combining skill sets and knowledge. So look for opportunities, say yes to them. Last thing on that point, and when I was training for the 2000 Olympic Games, I don't even think I said, I was a synchronized swimmer, a bronze medalist in 2000. Nisker didn't say that. Can't you tell from my smile? I'm just kidding. There was a 96 Olympian who said to me while I was training for the 2000 Olympic Games, people are going to be calling you and asking you to get involved in stuff. People will be saying, come here, do this. You can't do everything. You need to remember what your priorities are, but if you're interested in it and you can't do it, make sure you follow up and say, thank you. What a great opportunity. Please keep me in mind. I'm going to follow up with you after, this blackout season or whatever, and let's have a coffee or let's talk. And it's amazing how valuable that advice was. It actually led to my very first job. It also led to me being on Athletes Can when Mike harassed me. I met him at the clothing desk at Commonwealth Games. Amazing. So we've showered you with all sorts of advice, but Now the man that distracted me can ask his question.
Cool. My name is John Leslie. I'm with Paris Snowboard. What really stood out to me was the leverage thing and getting leverage. And you guys all being athletes and now business people, I was wondering, you know, we're lucky to have so many tools available to us right in this day of age as athletes. What would you suggest to be the key points now as business people that athletes should be using as leverage? Should be sitting on a board? Should we be focusing on public speaking? We have so much stuff, but if we could pick maybe 3 things to really focus in on that would give us that opportunity in business after our career in athletics, what would they be?
Well, I think for me, number 1 would be your network. And, you know, it's this 6 degrees of separation within your sport, within your family contacts, within your community. And, you know, LinkedIn and social media is a great tool. And, you know, we need to, you'll be exploiting that for your whole life. So get good at it, I think, is the important thing, because there's a lot of people that have a lot of love for sport and what you do, and they want to help you. But you've got to reach out to them and really develop that network.
Ditto.
Yeah. So for me, there's 2 things, because they kind of work together. The first one is be genuine in who you are. I think that is, people only like fake for a temporary moment. And so be genuine with who you are. The other thing is get to know people. I think so many of us spend a lot of time telling people about who we are, that we fail to find out about who somebody is. And remember, there's better chance that I am going to need that person more so than that person is going to need me. If you're going to need me, it's your job to figure out why you're going to need me.
I agree with both of those points. I think they're very much connected, right? So build your network, and we keep saying that. So obviously it's a salient point here. Build your network, and you build your network really 2 ways. So building relationships is really about helping other people and showing interest in them. And while you're doing that, you have a huge opportunity to share about yourself and show your value. But it takes a lot of pressure off when you think about networking as interest in other versus selling yourself.
And I think I'd add to that, and it's all related, but just building your own personal brand and really understanding who you are, who you want to be, and creating, you know, those principles that you stand by, and certainly giving more than you take, and being community-minded and thinking of others first is a, you know, a great starting point, and it'll pay dividends down the road.
Thanks, Dan. Any other questions? Jeremiah.
No, thankfully, thanks to Margie, I didn't end up having to go into the cashier route. But you know, as we talk about making that change, I will tell you this, that I got to a point after my project manager job. One of the things that and talk about being bold, Margie left about 3 months after she brought me in. So the person that brought me in with no experience, just this guy's an athlete off the street, retired 3 months later. So I was going like, what do I do now? But something that I've always done, I leveraged people that were in the building within the 3 months that I were there, and showed that, you know, I wasn't there out of fluke. She actually made a good choice, in bringing me there. So, sorry. Now I'm pulling one of these things because I have something else on. Ask that question again. Okay. What was the? Because I know
you weren't a cashier.
No. So yeah. So going. No. I'll tell you that what's partially has me distracted. I have a 8-week. Little girl, and
2 phones he has up here.
Yes, and my wife was calling me because I think she was going to be late picking up our 5-year-old. So she was trying to go like, "Can you go and get him?" But I'm making a choice of not answering it because and know that he's okay. The problem now is I'm gonna have to pay the $10 a minute for being late. So that's the choice that I've made. So that's part of why. But you know, just going back to that. So the job I had after that, I went into, from the project manager job, I became a manager in marketing. And you know, I started looking at it and I said, you know what, the core thing of what we do is we buy and we sell. And from being an athlete, it's kind of like, you know, there's some fundamental things that you have to do before you start race day or before whatever your sport is. And so I went and seek the opportunity to go into the store. So I took a step backward and went into one of the stores to become an associate store manager, and then got promoted to being a store manager. And I did end up on cash many, many times at Christmas time when the lines were too long. So you know what, again, it was one of those things. I did go there, but it was the best decision I've ever made because I understand what the business was about.
Can I tell my
Yep.
first job story? I think
Yes,
it's
please,
really,
Dan.
I think it's fascinating.
I hope it's a good one.
Personally, it's a good one. So I retired, and then I was involved with the Canadian Olympic Association at the time, Athletes Advisory Council. Ken Reid was the chair. And we had created this, and Jeremiah will find this interesting, we wanted to go and talk to the Olympic Trust at the time. They were sort of the marketing arm about Olympic Job Opportunity Program. So we did a sponsorship proposal, got it all together, and I went to the Olympic Trust, and the person there said, well, we don't do that. We just send out letters, and people send us money. It's really, that's what we do. So he said, if you want to do that, you're going to have to do it yourself. So I prepared this proposal, and my mother played golf with the CEO of Scotiabank. His name was Ced Ritchie at the time. And anyways, somehow I got in to see him, 6th floor of Scotiabank Plaza, or it was before the Scotiabank Plaza, that's how long ago it was. And I got in mahogany, big 7th floor, mahogany boardroom. He looks at me and says, no, we're not interested in that, but do you want a job? Because we're sponsoring the 1985 Canada Summer Games and we need some help. So he said, now there's this gentleman, Robert Patillo, go down and talk to him. And I went down, and before you knew it, I had a job. And I worked in corporate affairs for Scotiabank for 4.5 years, and decided I didn't want to be in the banking business. And then that's when I got into sports marketing, and that launched my career. So funny, you just never know where
you don't
where
know.
you're going to end up.
Yeah. It actually, that prompted me remembering what I was going to say before, which is there's Trevino was talking about the time clock, and this will be my last comment. You're standing there so beautifully with the flowers or whatever it is. I was remembering what it felt like to move from the peak of my athletic career. So I won a gold medal at the Commonwealth Games. I was in a sport that was doing really well, very organized, and I went into my first job, and it was a slower pace, and things didn't get done with the same level of discipline and speed. I didn't have as strong a voice at the table. It was, I was an entry-level person at this job. And I remember being very frustrated, going, and I'll admit, sorry, it was the COC. So I went in going, this is supposed to be about high performance, and I got very, very frustrated very quickly. And over the course of my 3-year tenure there, I realized that business sometimes does move at a much slower pace than sports do. And there are moments of real intensity. So I didn't want to lose my intensity. I wanted to do my job, but I learned to develop a level of patience. And it took a long time and a lot of biting my lip. And what I did was, much like athletes do, I said, I'm going to make the most of this opportunity. Like when you go to the games and you want to do everything in the village. I thought, it's a small organization. I'm going to get to know the marketing people. I'm going to understand marketing sponsorship rights. I'm going to help with events. I'm going to volunteer on any committee that comes up. I somehow became a part of this recreation of the website. I knew nothing about websites, and I ended up creating content for that. And it was basically, I made it the pace I wanted it to be, and I learned about every aspect of the business. So I'm saying that as an encouragement to don't be discouraged by the pace at which your first job, let's say, moves, do your best to find the opportunities in there that help you maintain that level of high performance that you're used to.
Can I give you guys one quick update? And this is what I was telling you about making choices and taking risk. So I just looked down on my phone, and my wife at 5:59 sent me a message saying, I just made it. 6 o'clock is pickup time, is the cutoff. So, you know what?
So with that happy news, we all feel a great level of relief. Now, I've been there. No, thank you, everyone. I don't know if are you staying tonight? Are you heading home? Some of us might be staying, certainly staying for dinner. And feel free to come and ask us. And thank you so much for your attention and patience today.
Thanks, guys.